James chapter 1. And would you please stand as I read? We'll start at verse 2 and just read a couple of verses, a few verses here. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." And then drop down to verse 12. "Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him." All right, you may be seated. Talk about the purpose of problems today. Last week was Back to Church Sunday, and we focused on better days ahead. And really the theme, the way to get better days ahead is to come to Jesus. That was really the core of the message last week. Give your life to Jesus. Come to Jesus. Give your problems to Jesus, and there can be better days ahead. Now, we all know that there are problems in life from time to time, right? And the writer here in James says, "Consider it pure joy when you face trials." You betcha. Doesn't that sound great? But that's what he says, because there's a purpose for our problems. Have you ever noticed that some Christians seem to have more problems than others? Maybe you feel like you're one of those. It reminds me of the old hee-haw song. "Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. Oh, if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me." Doesn't anybody remember that? These guys laying around, talking about how bad their life is. It seems like some people just tend to have more problems than others, and I can't really explain that. And sometimes there's no observable reason why that is. In fact, if you feel like that's you might have examined your life and tried to see, is there something I'm doing that's leading me into all these problems? You might be saying, I know I'm not perfect, but man, I'm really trying hard and I'm serving God the best I can. And still you find yourself saying, "Why me, Lord?" Well, it's okay to ask that question. The writers in the Bible sometimes ask that question, "Why me?" And sometimes there's an answer. There's a purpose for your problem. Today I want to deal with that. The power, the potential, the purpose of problems. And good can come from problems that we face in life. And the first one is this: problems can flex your faith. Problems can flex your faith. You find that in verse 3 there. It talks about faith. And in 1 Corinthians 16:13, it says that we are called to stand firm in the faith. And in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, the Apostle Paul, when he's near the end of his life, he says, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." Faith is so important to us, and our faith needs to be strengthened. Hebrews 11:6 says, "And without faith it is impossible to please God." You want to make God happy, you've got to have faith. That's where it begins, faith. And so we need to have strong faith. It's incredibly important, and our faith needs to be strong and growing. Even the 12 apostles who saw Jesus up close, face to face, asked him, "Lord, increase our faith." And one of the ways that our faith is increased is through our problems. Yay! Increase our faith by giving us more problems, God. Have you prayed for that lately? No, we don't tend to pray that way, and yet sometimes it works that way, that our problems can actually flex our faith. It's kind of like lifting weights. You want to gain some muscle tone, there's going to be some resistance in those weights. It's not going to be easy. There might be even some pain involved. In fact, the old adage is no pain, no gain. And faith sometimes works like that. Job, there's a whole book in the Bible about this guy named Job and all the problems he faced. And his faith was flexed. He learned to trust God even more through all of his problems. And the key here is keeping focus on Jesus in the midst of your problem. That's the key. And that's how your faith can be flexed and grow and be strong, by keeping your eyes on Jesus. Remember when Peter was walking on the water? Does anybody remember that story in the Bible? Okay, Jesus is coming out, walking on the water, and first the disciples are kind of freaking out, thinking it's a ghost, but then they realize it's Jesus, and so then Peter gets out and he's walking towards Jesus, but sooner or later he starts looking around and he sees the winds and the waves, and what happened? He started to sink. But then he got his eyes back on Jesus, and Jesus pulled him up out of that water. It's all about keeping your eyes on Jesus. In the midst of your problem, focus on Jesus, and your faith will be flexed. Here's my second thought. Problems produce perseverance. Perseverance. And perseverance here is not just kind of gritting your teeth and forcing your way through it. It really is cheerful endurance. When the Bible talks about perseverance, that's what it means. Cheerful endurance. Think of Paul and Silas when they were in prison. They were in chains because they had been preaching the gospel of Christ. They're bound and they're in jail just because of their faith. In fact, we just talked about this at Reach on Friday night. How would you react if you were thrown in jail and put in chains, and it's only because you're a Christian? Would you be feeling like you're having a good day? And I think most of us would say, no, probably not. And yet here's Paul and Silas in jail only because they're a Christian, and they're singing songs of praise. That is cheerful endurance. And problems can produce this perseverance, this cheerful endurance. We talk sometimes about the need to just keep pressing on. And Philippians chapter 3, verses 12 through 14 talks about this. It says, I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Press on. Keep on pushing forward. And problems can force you sometimes to persevere. I've talked before about Julie Moss. Great illustration of perseverance. In 1983, she was in the Ironman triathlon. And after a 2.4 mile rough water swim, a 112-mile bike race, and a 26.2 mile run, she found herself winning at the 25th mile. And her closest competitor was a mile behind her. Now, with only a half mile left to win the Ironman, this Julie Moss began cramping, and she shifted her gait to a bizarre, irregular motion. And within feet of the finish line, her legs gave out. And she tried to rise and walk, losing control of her body, and she starfished. It means she fell down and her arms just kind of splayed around her. And at one point, she struggled not to just be laying there, and you could see the footage of Kathleen McCartney's shoes passing her. As she's struggling, she was a whole mile in front of this gal. Now she's getting passed up as she's laying on the ground. And in her own words, she said, I thought, I can't get up again. I've sort of worn out that tactic, but I guess I can crawl. And so she crawled the last 10 yards of the race. And she even pushed herself to the point of losing control of bodily functions. And she shooed off those trying to help her up because she didn't want to be disqualified from the race. And she completed those last 10 yards 29 seconds after McCartney, the one who had passed her, and is still one of the smallest margins of victory ever in the Ironman competition. And then Moss says that she thinks about what it would have been like to win but she credits her near win for leaving her irrevocably changed. She says, "It was a pivotal moment in my life. That voice that I hadn't ever called upon that just said, keep moving forward." There was hardly anything left in the tank. In fact, you would say the tank was completely empty, and yet she found a way to keep going forward. Pressing on, perseverance. And problems can get us to that point of persevering. In Revelation chapter 2, verse 19, Jesus is talking to the church, and he says, "I know your deeds, your love and faith, your service and perseverance, and that you are now doing more than you did at first." And then he says, "To him who overcomes and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations." Jesus values perseverance. Cheerful endurance. Keeping on, no matter what. And sometimes problems put us in a place to learn how to persevere. Number 3, problems motivate maturity. Ephesians 4:13 is one of our primary verses as we think about what church is all about. And just at the end of the passage it says, "Until we become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ." We want to be mature in our faith. We don't want to stay baby Christians forever, right? Okay, a few of you want to grow up in your faith. And problems can motivate maturity. Oswald Chambers, speaking of maturity, says, "Maturity is the stage where the whole life has been brought under the control of God." Where it's all in God's hands. That's maturity. Chuck Swindoll says, "One of the marks of spiritual maturity is the quiet confidence that God is in control without the need to understand why he does what he does." I like that. Maturity says, I know God is in control even if it makes no sense to me whatsoever. That's a mature outlook. I mentioned Job earlier. He suffered like few have ever suffered in history. And he could find no rhyme or reason to it. In fact, his friends came and they all tried to explain why he was having these problems, but all of their explanations were insufficient. But finally, Job said about God, "Even though he would slay me, I will hope in him." That's maturity. No matter what comes my way, whether it makes sense or not, even if God would choose to take me from this life, I'm going to trust God. That's maturity. Romans 5, verse 3 and 4 says, "We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope." Now, we've already talked about perseverance, and now we're talking about maturity, and it follows in line there. It produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, which I think is equal to maturity. Character, it follows in order of perseverance. As you persevere through your problems, you can become more mature in your faith. Somebody said there are no shortcuts on the way to spiritual maturity. Know what that means? If there's no shortcuts, you're going to have to go through some hard times to get there. It's just the way it is. Somebody else said, if we're not perfect, let us at least be progressing. Is there any perfect person in the room here today? Only in Christ. That's a good answer. So let us be progressing then. And John McNaughton speaks of maturity. He says, maturity begins to grow when you can sense your concern for others outweighing your concern for yourself. And you're starting to put other people first. And that leads me to number 4. Problems cultivate compassion. 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4 says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. You see, problems cultivate compassion. We learn to have sympathy for other people because I know what you're going through. Because I've experienced something like that. And so you can't just blow people off so easily, but you can understand their situation. Problems cultivate compassion. Somebody said, no man is a good physician who has never been sick. Right? You know, if I've been sick, then when you're sick, boy, I feel for you because I just had that. You know what I mean? And ministry often flows from past problems. How many have ever heard of a homeless outreach that is now led by people who once were homeless? Yeah, the way it goes. Ex-cons who now minister in jailhouses. Survivors of abuse who now minister to people who are being abused. God tends to work like that, and problems can cultivate compassion in us. We feel for other people. Psalm 66, verse 16 says, come and listen, all you who fear God. Let me tell you what he has done for me. God got me through this. And so I can encourage you, God will get you through that. Problems cultivate compassion. And Dr. Jack Hyles wrote this poem. I'm just going to read some of it. It's actually pretty long. Even what I'm reading is a little longer than what I would normally share. But he's talking about, he was a pastor, and so I can relate to this, how sometimes people come with problems when the pastor himself is having problems. Okay? And I think it applies to all of us, but listen to the poem. He says, a troubled soul came to my door, a problem to confide. I had a problem too that day. 'Twas hard for me to hide. My problem was a mountain steep, and his just a hill. My problem was an ocean wide, and his a tiny nil. Yet 'tis my lot to fill his need and put mine on the shelf, for I must lay my heartache down and hide it from myself. He told me of a broken heart while mine was breaking too. I told him of a mending God who maketh all things new. Another came when I was sick to say he had the flu. His fever was 101. Mine was 102. Another weeping seeker came for me, his tears to dry. I went alone and wiped my eyes, then told him not to cry. Another came when I was tired to say he needed rest. I lifted him with weary arms and tried to give him zest. And now it's late and all have gone, each one to his abode, so I must find my problems and regain my heavy load. Where is the burden I had borne? I had it a while ago. Where is the problem I must solve? I left it here. I know. Where is the darkness I once knew? I now see only light. The chains, the tears, the pains, the fears are now nowhere in sight. I cannot find my broken heart. Where is my fevered brow? I have a song. The tears are gone. I cannot find them now. My sickness now hath turned to health, and trust replaceth fright. Assurance covers all my doubts. My darkness now is light. I heard a voice from heaven say, my child, 'tis always true. When you take care of others' needs, I will take care of you. Isn't that good? And that's just a portion of what he wrote about how when we help others, God just tends to help us. You know, there's that old adage, those who help themselves, how's that go? God helps those who help themselves. Okay, that's not a biblical word. Okay, but I'd like to twist it to say, God helps those who help others. Now, I think that's pretty true. And we see that many times. I think this is some of the essence when Jesus said it's better to give than to receive. Okay, we often apply that to money, but how about just people are hurting and in need, and so we help them rather than focus on our own problem. And then kind of magically, we feel a little bit better too. That's the economy of God's kingdom. And problems can cultivate compassion. And then finally, number 5, problems set the scene for the supernatural. I like this one. The Gospels and Acts showed this. Let me tell you this. All miracles have one thing in common. They started with a problem. Want to see some miracles? How many are in favor of seeing some miracles? You betcha. Well, guess what? Somebody has to have a problem first. Anybody want to volunteer for that position? I'll be the problem so God can do a miracle. We don't think like that, but it's true. And Jesus encountered a lot of people with problems. Think about the blind man that came to Jesus. And Jesus touched his eyes, and he was miraculously healed. That man had a problem, but Jesus did a miracle for him. The woman who had the bleeding issue for so many years, she had a problem, but Jesus healed her. 5,000 people came to hear Jesus preach, and they were hungry. They had a problem, but Jesus did a miracle and fed them all. The leper who came to Jesus, he had a problem because he was sick and he was an outcast, but Jesus did a miracle and that man was cleansed. Peter was in prison because of preaching the gospel of Christ. He had a problem, but God sent an angel and delivered him. So what's your problem? What is your miracle waiting to happen? There is purpose in problems. There's purpose. For some, we just need to strengthen our faith. Keep our eyes on Jesus in the midst of our problems. Sometimes we just need to persevere and trust God will get us through eventually. And we just trust him no matter what. For some, God's wanting us to step up and grow up a little bit. He's putting a test before us so that we'll take the next step in our walk with him and become more mature in our faith. For others, he wants us to learn to be compassionate for other people. So he's allowing us to go through this problem so that we'll have a little more tender heart towards somebody else. And then there may be some that God just is setting you up to do a miracle in your life. I don't know which the case may be, but I do know this. There is a purpose in your problem. God will achieve his purposes no matter what is coming in your life. The key for all of these things, all 5 of them, whichever it may be, is to trust God and listen for God and just follow him, whatever the case may be. Amen? Would you please